If we look at Japan from the outside, it appears to be a land of advanced robotics, an incredible culture, the fourth largest economy in the world, and a population known for its health and longevity. Add to that a roster of globally renowned companies, and at first glance, Japan might seem like an ideal country. However, a closer look reveals a less polished reality. While the positive aspects are undeniably true, there's a darker side to life in Japan that remains hidden from most of the world. Millions of people in the country struggle to fit into society, often retreating into complete isolation. They find themselves shut out from opportunities for employment, marriage, or the chance to live a normal, fulfilling life. These individuals are part of what's called the lost generation, representing roughly 15% of Japan's population. Their heartbreaking story symbolizes Japan's fall from its former glory and serves as a warning of potential future upheavals. This is the shadowed side of Japan, the story of its lost generation. While this phenomenon might be overlooked today, back in the 1980s, Japan was seen as the next economic superpower, poised to overtake the United States and dominate the global economy, much like the narrative surrounding China today. The belief in this inevitable rise was so strong that it sparked significant anxiety in the U.S. Articles of the time speculated about an economic Pearl Harbor, envisioning Japan buying out America entirely. Movies like Die Hard, Rising Sun, and Blade Runner tapped into this fear, portraying Japanese corporations as poised to take control of the U.S. and the world. This anxiety stemmed from the Japanese economic miracle, a remarkable 3 decades of extraordinary growth fueled by a unique economic system that, at the time, was seen as superior to the Western model. This system revolved around the close cooperation between massive corporate cartels and the Japanese government. These corporate alliances, known as keiretsu, were networks of Japan's largest corporations that held shares in one another and worked collaboratively to support mutual growth. Backed by the government through substantial loans from Japan's state-owned bank, these alliances had access to seemingly unlimited capital, enabling their aggressive expansion into international markets. At the same time, the government shielded Japan's domestic market by blocking foreign companies from entering. While this system was neither fair nor entirely sustainable, it worked remarkably well within Japan's borders. Japanese corporations were conquering industry after industry, and ordinary citizens believed that with hard work and a college degree, they could secure a stable job at a major corporation, a job that often came with the promise of lifetime employment. Japan seemed unstoppable, and everything was going incredibly well. But then, something happened. By 1991, Japan had experienced 3 decades of unprecedented growth, firmly establishing itself as the world's second-largest economy after the United States. During this period, real estate prices and the value of publicly traded companies skyrocketed. By the late 1980s, however, this rapid growth reached a euphoric high, transforming into a speculative bubble that would ultimately burst. Essentially, everyone believed the economic boom and the rise in asset values would last forever, that the more you invested, the more money you would make. Meanwhile, the Bank of Japan continued printing and lending money to practically anyone who applied, regardless of the purpose of the loan or the credibility of the borrowers. Then, one day, the bubble burst. Over the course of 1990, the stock market plummeted by 43%, and real estate prices followed suit. The collapse of the bubble meant that ordinary people had significantly less money to spend, and investors lost interest in Japanese businesses, bringing the economic boom to a screeching halt. In the years following the bubble's burst, widespread corruption within Japanese corporations and the government came to light. Insider trading, stock manipulation, fraud, bribery, and the reckless issuance of loans created hundreds of zombie companies, businesses that should have failed long ago but were kept alive through easy access to cheap government loans. Within a decade, Japan went from being hailed as an economic tiger to being labeled the sick man of Asia. While this dramatic fall was severe, it wasn't entirely unique. Economies around the world experience ups and downs as part of the natural cycle. However, in Japan's case, the recession had catastrophic effects on an entire generation, and the consequences of that era still linger to this day. To understand why this happened, it's essential to explore how Japan's labor market and hiring culture function, an environment that is, to say the least, extraordinarily intense and unlike any other job market in the world. A corporate career in Japan typically begins with a unique job-hunting ritual known as Shushoku Katsudo, which university graduates undertake after completing their studies. Many companies, including the largest keiretsu, hire new graduates only once a year, and in large numbers. These graduates undergo a grueling job-hunting process filled with group interviews and seminars, where thousands of applicants, all dressed in identical black and white suits, compete for positions. At the end of this process, successful candidates secure a job that they often hold for decades, sometimes until retirement. This practice, known as shushin koyo, or lifetime employment, provides workers with remarkable stability but also creates an incredibly rigid labor market. These hiring practices, prevalent in the 1990s and still common in Japan today, reflect the country's dedication to structure and tradition, but they also reveal the challenges of adapting to a modern and dynamic economy. If you don't secure a good job immediately after graduating from university in Japan, the chances of getting a second opportunity are slim. Once hired, it's expected that you'll stay with the same company for your entire career. But if you fail to get hired, you're effectively locked out, with the doors to most companies remaining closed forever. However, when the economic bubble burst and the boom came to an end, this long-standing ritual was shattered. After 1990, most companies froze their hiring processes entirely for nearly a decade, opting to retain their existing workforce during the economic crisis. Hiring eventually resumed in the new century, but securing a job became significantly harder. For an entire generation of people who graduated in the 1990s, it was already too late. Companies were no longer hiring fresh graduates, leaving millions behind and condemning them to a lifetime of low-paying, temporary jobs. This period came to be known as the Employment Ice Age, and those who graduated during this time earned the label of the Lost Generation. As Japan's economy never fully recovered, young people graduating in the 2000s and 2010s joined the ranks of the Lost Generation, and the past 30 years collectively became known as the Lost Decades. The plight of Japan's Lost Generation is not just a personal tragedy for those affected. It casts a long shadow over the entire society and the country's future. Now in their 30s and 40s, much of this generation is absent from the workforce, often financially dependent on their parents, unable to start families or advance in their careers. Comprising nearly 17 million people, this age group is a vital demographic for any nation's economy. Typically, they would be driving economic growth through spending on housing, consumer goods, and services. However, in Japan, this group's economic contribution is noticeably lacking, a direct result of the Employment Ice Age, the period after the economic bubble burst when hiring freezes left countless graduates without opportunities. Compounding the issue is Japan's severe aging crisis, with nearly 30% of the population now elderly. This superaging society is further strained by the fact that many in the Lost Generation never established careers or families, meaning they are not part of the active, working population. This imbalance between retirees and the working-age population creates an unsustainable dynamic for the country's long-term future. Another troubling aspect is the rise of the hikikomori phenomenon, individuals, predominantly men, who withdraw entirely from society and often rely on their parents for financial support. Originally consisting mainly of members of the Lost Generation now in their 30s and 40s, this trend has started affecting younger generations as well. Unable to cope with the stress and competitiveness of Japan's rigid labor market, these individuals retreat from societal pressures altogether. The Japanese government is acutely aware of the negative impact these issues have on both society and the economy. Efforts have been made to help the Lost Generation recover and reintegrate into the workforce, but the challenges remain daunting. Without significant and effective intervention, these intertwined problems threaten to deepen the economic and social strain on the nation. However, the success of these initiatives has been limited, largely due to the persistence of Japan's rigid work culture and the lack of opportunities for those who don't fit into the traditional model of lifetime employment. As a result, millions remain trapped in this cycle of despair, and the issue continues to grow as more young people struggle to find their place in Japan's challenging job market. As long as Japan's economy remains stagnant and its work culture fails to adapt to the needs of a modern workforce, the future of this generation, and Japanese society as a whole, remains uncertain. Now, tell us, what stood out to you the most? If you've made it to the end of this video, Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Your support motivates me to keep bringing you more insightful content. See you in the next video.